Yeah, so they had, we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the rig shuffling machines, that have been doctored to include this hidden technology that could read the cards on the deck. So you can see, which player had the best poker hand. And then they had they're like decoy phones that were placed on the table, and they could surreptitiously detect, which cards were on the table. And some of these playing cards also had markers that were visible only to some of the players who were in on the game that were wearing these specially designed contact lenses or sunglasses. And I think I said earlier, I had a friend of mine who does do these these underground games that are legit, but there have been stories of Eastern European gangsters and other guys who do wear these contacts or these glasses. They're able to spot cards that have been marked that only the contacts can detect, and ultimately use that to their anti-capitalist, anti-establishment. It's just ridiculous and terrifying. So,
welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you tonight?
I am doing excellent, Ray. I hope you are too.
I am. Thank you. Jim, I'm pretty excited today. Our guest is Daniel Rosen, the senior reporter for the New York Sun. Dan's work has been featured in Esquire magazine, the New York Observer, City Journal, New York Magazine, and the New York Times. He's known for covering the FBI, past, which is you and I, the present, and the future. Dan, welcome to the Cold Red Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Dan, welcome aboard. Tell us, Dan, if you don't mind, a little bit about yourself. How did you get into journalism, and where did it all begin for you? And walk our audience through that.
Of course. I got in late. Around, I was probably 27. I had worked in book publishing, but I hadn't written for a newspaper since I graduated from high school. But I did a story for Newsday. They liked it. They brought me on as a stringer, and I just worked my way up to reporter. And I just did a lot of breaking news in New York City. The miracle on Hudson, the crash landing of Sully. What else was there? Just sort of a whole slew of like kind of monumental New York City cases during the late 2000s. And then how I got into the FBI reporting was I was working for the New York Observer at the time, and I covered this story about this guy named Mike Kovacevic, who was arrested on a plane. He was arrested on a flight bound for Hungary. It turned out to be a con man who was wanted for stealing from the apartments in the building he worked in. And I had met with him in prison, and he had confessed to me that he was in fact an FBI informant and had been for a number of years. And he worked specifically with the Brooklyn Queens MRA, with a guy named Steve Carbone and Warren Flagg.
I'm good friends with Steve Carbone.
Really? Yeah.
He was involved in the Goodfellas case with Henry Hill, the Lufthansa heist. He's an older guy. He's older than me and Ray, but he was definitely a very good agent back then. Continue.
Yeah. No, Steve, to kind of fast forward, but I've kept in touch. Steve and I talk fairly regularly, but they basically said that this guy was such a good informant that he would infiltrate stolen car rings. He had the ability to speak, Romance languages to all Slavic languages. So he could really infiltrate any of these organized crime rings, but he was also a terrible thief. He had targeted old ladies and ruined a lot of lives. And so one of them being the widow of a football player. I don't know if you remember, he played for the Giants, Spider Lockhart. He died of cancer. This is before they won the 86 Super Bowl. But this guy had stolen his championship ring that was given to him posthumously, or given to his widow. And Warren Flagg had to go to all the pawn shops to buy it back. Over time, I had kept in touch with a lot of those guys who worked in the BQ because, I had learned that all these guys had worked these big cases in the FBI history. Like Jim Murphy, who was a NASAC there, he was in the bank robbery squad in New York City. He was involved in the Dog Day Afternoon robbery.
You're going way back, so that's. I was there in the 80s and 90s. You're talking about the 70s here, and I ran into some of those guys. And just so everyone knows, the FBI in New York was at 26 Federal Plaza, but they have a number of satellite agencies. One of them was the Brooklyn Queens Resident Agency, and that was as big as some other divisions around the U.S. There were maybe 200 agents there, give or take, and they worked a lot of the mob squads were out that way, including some of the people you just mentioned.
Yeah, and so wait, did you work in the MRA or did you work in the New York field office?
No, I was in Lower Manhattan in the bank robbery squad. Steve Carbone was my sort of principal relief, they used to call them, Ray, I guess.
Yeah.
The next in charge after the unit chief or the supervisor. But yeah, he was a good guy, very supportive of me. I was rookie on the squad, but I was a police officer for 11 years before that. So he gave me some leeway where he wouldn't have given some other rookies. So good guy, lives in Brooklyn, a big golfer I know. And last I heard, he's still out there and doing well, but it's been a while. Mm-hmm. So Steve, if you're listening, Jim Fitz says hi.
So you worked, because it's funny, because like guys like you and Jim Murphy and who are former NYPD cops, they loved guys like that because you guys came in with a very unique, not the unique mentality, but you came in with essentially a lot of cred, whereas you weren't sort of like these, the Washington, D.C. or out-of-towners who seemed to be a bit too highfalutin, if you will, for the role, especially in bank robbery squad.
Yeah, and we're talking about you tonight, but yeah, I was an odd fit that I was one of the rare rookies that got right onto the bank robbery squad. That never really happened. But because I was a cop for 11 years before, not NYPD, I was suburban Philly, but I was a sergeant and they knew I could handle myself. So it worked out well for me. But interesting that, and I was to hear these stories about the old days, the Dog Day afternoon, which folks, if you're not aware, that's a movie from the 70s with Al Pacino based on a real case of a Brooklyn bank takeover in which, the building was surrounded for the whole day and he's making various demands. It's a very good movie. And it was a very interesting case, and I won't ruin the ending, but some agents had to do what they had to do at the end, and went from there. So yeah. And then you're not an older guy either, Dan. I can tell by looking at you. But obviously, you've maintained some friendships with these older agents, and who retired even well before I did, and kept in touch, and obviously are familiar with the stories from back in the day. They were some interesting days in the New York office in the late 60s, early 70s. A lot of the radical stuff going on, and bombings and things like that, assassinations. So, and we're back to the Hungarian guy.
Yeah, we're back to the Hungarian guy. But I will say, especially in light of like what I'm doing in the New York Sun, there are strong parallels between the late 70s in New York to today, where, when Judge Webster took over as director, Griffin Bell had passed down the indictments against Mark Felt and a number of former high-ranking FBI officials for spying on members of the Weathermen, and it caused somewhat. I don't want to say like it's exactly what we're seeing now, but it caused considerable upheaval within the bureau, and it definitely impacted morale. Just from the agents I had spoken to who had worked around then, because Wally LaPrade, who was the head of the New York office, he was forced out, not unlike how James Dennehy, who was very popular within the office, and Brian Driscoll, along with them, were forced out somewhat in unpopular fashion within the bureau. And so I think just to get ahead of myself, like what appealed to me about the FBI, and specific to Mike and to the guys like Carbone, was just how like the past is present, especially with a law enforcement agency like the Bureau, where you had gone from, I don't know how many years of Hoover to some of these really these transitional periods where they wasn't really until Webster, you can argue, that they found their footing and they had actually established a very strong identity in going after organized crime, white collar crime, BC app scam, all these, kind of big cases of that day were under his watch. And what you're seeing now, where a lot of it is being, as current leadership calls it, their goal is to crush violent crime. But there have been, and there's some agents who do welcome some type of change to that, but there's also a lot of concern that they're moving away from the very serious threats, and that what's being prioritized now could come at the expense of other serious international domestic threats, to speak more broadly. But it remains to be seen. But I think, so through Mike, I had met Steve Carbone and Jim Murphy, and Lou Scalero and Ed Guevara and a few others who had worked out of the New York office. Ed Guevara, who worked also at the Boston College case, we'll talk about in a few. And I had stepped away from journalism, but I come back and for the New York Sun, and it was a few guys I'd worked with at the New York Post ages ago who are now there. And it's just been great, but it's also been a lot because, this is sort of a period of a big transition for both the Bureau and the Justice Department and for many other government agencies as a whole.
You do any work with Don Kleber up there?
No.
He was in the BQ. He was a SWAT guy, bank robbery guy, and then he wound up sitting on the desk for a little bit. He just passed recently, but he was a very good friend.
Yeah.
He was also in the New Rochelle RA. Right. Big guy, about 6'9".
Right.
Couldn't miss him.
Oh,
yeah. Wow. Yeah, there's some real characters that came out of the New York office, and I have a friend there right now, a young agent, and she's enjoying herself very much. And it's the best work in the bureau, they say. Mm-hmm. The bureau, the New York office has its own set of rules. There's bureau rules, New York rules. If anyone reads my third book, the last chapter is about Unabomber, but the 19 before that are all my days in the New York City, including some stories about Steve Carbone. And what a good acting supervisor he was, or principal relief. So we're back to this Hungarian guy. You're still talking to him in prison, and he's an FBI informant. Of course, a lot of people claim they were informants, but it sounds like this guy was the real deal.
He was, and he had been passed down from one handling agent to another handling agent. So when Warren Flagg retired, he had worked with another agent who I'd spoken with who had just recently retired. Mike was used it was the Kennedy Fried Chicken heroin case, where that basically, I think it was the ties to the Taliban, where heroin was being imported into the country and being sold out of this chain of fried chicken restaurants, Kennedy Fried Chicken, among other venues. And Mike was basically used as an informant to introduce, if you guys, I'm sure you know, Joaquin Garcia, when he was working undercover, Mike had introduced him to some people to buy heroin inside these like fried chicken restaurants. And so the guy had really, he was one of those people who knew how to play the game in his favor. The downside to that is he did use it as like a get out jail free card.
They all do.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys went through that in your careers, some informants.
All the time. Yeah. You recently coined an article. The title of it was NBA Gambling Scandal is the Tip of the Iceberg. Exposes weak rules, giant loopholes for betting on individual athlete performances. So Jim and I were just talking about this today, and we said, you know what? We need to discuss this story on the show. And there's a friend of mine. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an author. His name is David Porter.
Okay, yeah.
Did the Boston College. He wrote the book Fitz, the Boston College Scandal of the 70s. Do you see any parallels between these two things? I mean,
for the article, I did interview Ed McDonald, who was in the organized crime strike force for the Boston College. And there is some parallels in the sense of just, I think the most obvious of just how easy it was to really, corrupt the game for the purposes of making a quick buck. I think the difference between the two, and perhaps is the most frightening, or at least the most concerning, is prop betting, where it seems so much easier to basically, lack of paraphrase, to corrupt that part of the game for prop betting. If you could, as was the case with Terry Rozier, who was a Charlotte Hornet and later a Miami Heat player, if he's conspiring with others to have them bet on his unders, and then he just, feigns an injury later that game. This is a guy who's making over $100 million, who's made over $100 million in his career. But Ed McDonald had said this to me, which is, for a lot of these guys, if you have a chance to make $100,000 very quickly just by sitting out a game, they're going to take it. And so I think that the similarities are definitely, with Boston College, it was, two Pittsburgh mobsters who had worked with, who was a Rick Kuhn and two other players to shave points. And the money was not nearly as high as it is now. And they were really, it was more of a team conspiracy, or at least, more than three players had to conspire to get the desired outcome. Whereas this, it was just basically because of prop betting, all you need is one player. And not to go sort of back and forth on this, but like in the case of Rozier, 2 days before the news had come down, Adam Silver himself had said that, he knew that prop betting was problematic because of, there was a two-way player, Jonte Porter, who was with the Raptors, and he's now facing 20 years in prison, but he had basically was using inside information to conspiring with others to basically profit off his unders by faking injuries or just impacting or manipulating his performance. And so Silver had said, the prop betting is a problem. And, they at that point, they're thinking more specifically about two-way players who are going from the G League up to the pros on temporary contracts or so. Because those are the guys who are not making as much money, and those are the guys who can make, they can make a good deal of retirement money by, working with mobsters or gamblers to kind of manipulate the outcome or manipulate their unders.
Daniel, for our audience that may not understand what prop betting is, can you kind of explain that and walk them through that?
Yep. So prop betting, the idiot, meaning my idiot's guide, which is very, very, very basic, but you can wager on if a guy's going to be scoring X amount of points, or if a guy's going to get if Fitz is going to get 10 points, 15 rebounds, and you can wager on this over and say actually it's going to get more than 12 points. But in the case of here, if Rozier basically feigned an injury, so those who bet the unders rather than his overs on the prop betting made out very handsomely. According to the complaint, these guys had used like a whole network of people to place the bets on the unders with various bookies and various sports betting sites. And so it's become problematic because if, you can wager on any player. Now, I don't do it myself. I hate losing money. So, and I'm not very good at gambling. It has become a very profitable, evidently it's become a very profitable scheme for those who are willing to kind of.
So if I understand this right, I can bet on just about anything, almost down to the, what color socks or shoes is he going to wear that game? I mean, does it get that bad? I mean, I've seen things like that, How many minutes is he going to play?
Yep.
Right. How many assists is he going to have? I mean, they get down into the nitty gritty with these things. So you can almost bet on anything. It's amazing.
It is amazing. I think Adam, who was it? David Stern, when sports gambling was legalized, I mean, he was concerned for this very same reason. Eventually he turned around, but he did see the fact that this could be exploited for all the wrong reasons, especially by the wrong people. And I think the Rozier indictment, it was in some ways eye-opening because of the fact that here's a guy, again, who's made millions upon millions of throughout his career, and he's still doing this for the sake of, a six-figure payout. So it means anyone is corruptible. So it'll be interesting to see how they're starting to discuss changing the rules. But it seemed it was only a matter of time. And I think, to the point of being the tip of the iceberg, who knows how else this could be exploited, because there are probably some ways that we don't even know yet.
Well, let me ask you, do you think this same thing that's happened in the NBA has crept into some of the other professional sports arenas, like baseball, football?
Oh yeah. I'm saying that without proof, but it's, without evidence, I imagine, yes, especially in college. And Ed McDonald had said this, because college is, you have players who they're not salary players, or some of them. And if this is a case where they can if they're not going to go pro, and this is an opportunity for them to make money prior to graduating, absolutely. And then that could apply to football, that could apply to basketball. But basketball, to me, seems to be the easiest sport to kind of manipulate these prop bets to your advantage, because it's so it's so stat heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Jimmy. Go ahead.
No, I'm just going to further delineate. Sports gambling has only been legalized 10 years now, give or take. I know you have to live in certain states to bet, but you can do, games worldwide, I believe. You have to, your computer base has to be a certain place. So there are some basic rules in play. I think you have to be over 18. I'm not even sure how that can be enforced. But illegal gambling's been around for years. I knew guys in my old neighborhood in Philly of Olney that, they, over the weekend, they'd be passing out these little slips, and you can, fill in certain circles, who's going to win, what the point spread is. You give it back to them. I did this maybe 5 times in my life. And I knew it was illegal. And you trusted the guy. You gave them $5, and depending who won the game that week. But they were always teams, and it was point spreads. As far as I recall back then, Ray, and maybe you knew some about this back in the 60s, 70s. I don't remember these prop bets that we're hearing about now.
No.
And they may have been in Vegas. There may have been more sophisticated ways of doing it. But for everyday betting, even the illegal, so to speak, That was done that way. Then legal betting came along. And of course, there's always point spreads. And as Dan was saying, I mean, you don't even have to, your team doesn't even have to lose a game to benefit people that are, you can still win. But if you don't score that extra touchdown or field goal, or you missed a few free throws at the end with the point spread, the bettors can still win that have maybe paid you or will pay you a bowling bag full of cash if you in fact deliver in that way. Again, there's the props bets that are very individualized to the player. It's kind of like the fantasy league that a lot of young people play today, but there's money involved in betting, and it's on a weekly or nightly basis, as opposed to the team sports or the all-team betting in which the point spreads can be manipulated somehow, which I believe was the Boston College scenario. It was a few games. It wasn't just one game, right?
Yep, it was about 9 games.
Yeah, which was in the late 60s.
That we know about.
It was the late 70s or
okay. Lost track there of that, but yeah, that was a big headline back then. And we don't, just to mix one other thing in my last year in the FBI, even in the profiling unit in Quantico, Virginia, I was contacted by some people I knew in the New York office on a hush-hush case. And that was the case of an NBA ref who had gone bad. And his name is Tim Donahue. And I was helping them put together an interview strategy, so I was helping the agents put together an interview strategy of him. And of course, some of the people around him, some of the mobsters that he was working with. And this guy's done his jail time. He's out. He was commenting over the weekend when the NBA arrests. He did his thing. But this has been going on college level, late 70s, early 80s, NBA refs, 07. In the last week, the number of NBA people, John C. Billups, of course, Terry Rozier, Damon Jones, and probably others. And there wasn't gaps in between with no gambling at all. This has been going on the whole time, but every once in a while, we'll see what informant came about, who got in trouble, and said, hey, guys, you're going to lock me up. I can give you a dirty poker game. I can tell you what a player's doing out in Portland or a coach, whatever, and they take it from there. So it's out there. It ain't going away. And good luck now that Vegas is involved trying to control this. Much easier said than done.
Yeah. Daniel, I want to just kind of build on this a little bit. And a lot of people really, this is kind of like foreign to them when you talk about most people, unless you're people like us, are not really that into sports. I'm very much into it. But for our audience members who may not follow sports, could you kind of set the stage for us and explain how this whole thing broke?
So the way it broke was Terry Rozier, who again, he had been under investigation before this had broken, under suspicion of gambling on games.
And he's a Miami Heat player.
He's a Miami Heat player. And so one of them was this game in question where he had basically took himself out of a game because of a foot injury. But then it had raised suspicion that, there were another thing was Chauncey Billups, who figures in, and I'm sorry, I apologize for the rambling way I'm telling this, but Chauncey Billups, he was involved in a separate indictment that was announced at the same time, but is actually in this indictment as co-conspirator number 8, because one of the things that had come out in this was that the injury reports, players that were expected who weren't listed on the injury report and were listed as questionable leading up to the game. In the case of Chauncey Billups, he was the head coach of the Trailblazers, and I think it was 2023. Their star player was Damian Lillard. I believe he was was considered questionable, but then ultimately did not play. It was announced that he was out of the game, but before inside information was sent out that he was in fact not going to play that game, which gave those who wager on this type of stuff some time to put in the bets. And Damon Jones, who's a former player and also like an unofficial coach, he was accused of doing something similar for the Lakers in regards to LeBron James, who was similar to that, was not expected to be, was on the questionable list, but then was eventually sat out for the game. And I think also actually funny enough, I think if I'm not mistaken, one of those games, Damon Jones gave out information that LeBron was going to sit out. He actually ended up playing and beating the other team. And I believe the guys who Damon Jones gave this inside information to demanded their money back from him. But so really, just to kind of give you the overarching thing, the fact that all this information can be tipped off to the right parties in exchange for money. The case of Damon Jones and the case of Terry Rozier, who received a very handsome payout after his, like in the case of this, after his injury and after sitting out so he could hit his unders. That's where it gets effectively problematic. Because as opposed to just saying this guy's not playing, if you're saying that and getting some good money for it, then yeah, that's a conspiracy.
And Jim, tell me if I'm right or wrong here, and I'll throw this out to you, Dan. From my perspective, as a former FBI agent, when I look at this case, some people think, oh, it just started a month ago or 2 months ago. Matter of fact, they say it started over a year ago. I wouldn't be surprised if there were underlyings even longer than that ago, because it takes time. In other words, when someone comes to you and they give you, as an agent, and they give you a piece of information, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go, well, where did you get this from? You're going to want to know a little bit more. And it takes time for this to evolve into something that you can even grasp what's happening. And then you hear something, you're not sure if this guy what's his motive for saying this? What's his motive for doing this? It has to be, always look, somebody that got burned, or a female that was either a girlfriend or something on the side that this guy said something to somebody, and she got pissed because he slighted her or something of that nature. And she went and she kind of got this ball rolling. And the more it went down the hill, the more moss it grabbed, and it just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's how I see this thing coming about. I don't see it happening by just someone's going, hey, let me tell you about this. I think this was a long time coming. And then you got to get in on the inside, and you got to start, manipulating, you got to start formulating things and making things happen. And people don't understand how good of a job the agents did that were involved in this, and the amount of work that went in on this to make this case go. And I'll tell you what, they probably stopped short. And I'll bet you if you talk to them when they're done with their career, they said, you know what? We don't know how far this thing went, but we decided to just stop here and do this. But because people were getting hurt. So rather than let it continue to go, but I'll tell you what, I'll bet you they could have continued to go. And there's others out there that haven't even been touched. And that's where it comes in, where you say, hey, this is the tip of the iceberg, And is that your point for that, Daniel? Is that why you believe it's the tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, man, I think that actually came from Tim Donaghy. He had appeared that night with Chris Swecker on an appearance of Cuomo. But he had said, he himself had said, like, this could very well be the tip of the iceberg, in the sense that you look at the college level, you look at all the different ways this can manifest, to your point. And so, yeah, I think if Donaghy's saying that, then by all means, we should expect to see similar controversies break.
If I could just say, Ray, going back to what you said earlier, we have a church of illegal gambling, but they're really the front and the back pews of the two. And we should make this clear here. There are two separate sets of crimes, sets of indictments, one involving crooked poker games, which we really haven't touched on yet much tonight. And the other part is the NBA, illegal betting, and what we talked about with Dan so far. I have a feeling, and maybe this is even listed in the indictment, I'm not sure, but I have a feeling information either of a crooked card game came first or the NBA information came first. And one person started talking, well, as long as you're aware of this, and you're going to arrest me for this, I can tell you about these card games happening in New York at these fancy hotels. They bring people in. They have these poker tables with x-rays underneath. It's almost like out of a James Bond movie or something, but not in any sort of a sexy or glamorous way. It's a bunch of low-life mobsters and, quite frankly, professional athletes and whatever they call them, Johns or victims, I don't know. But for the guys that come in spending that good money. But like someone said on TV last week, there's a lot of people saying, damn, I knew I was a better poker player than that, losing that $1.5 million. So so what do you know too? And like these, I was certainly aware in the past there'd be these big poker games and they'd invite some kind of a celebrity, and they may have been legit poker games, and it's an NBA player, maybe a movie, entertainment guy, whatever, but usually probably a sports guy. and it would track other big spenders. And it may be fully legit, but these games happening, at least some in New York, they may have been elsewhere, with this X-ray poker table with contact lenses and cell phone information going back and forth. It's pretty amazing with technology what they did. Dan, walk us through a little bit on that part, because whatchamacallit, Damon Jones is the only person so far, and he's the former Cleveland Cavalier and an assistant coach somewhere. He's caught up in both of these separate yet related enterprises. What can you tell us more about the poker games?
And to add to that, as is Chauncey Billups.
Right, that's right.
Yes. Because he's named as co-conspirator in the other one. But I think they called them fish. The Johns, I think they called them fish. But basically, they would have these high-stakes poker games in Washington Square and Lexington and Lexington Avenue in East Hampton. And guys like Chauncey Billups would be used as the lure. So it would be, come play with NBA champion Chauncey Billups. And as you had said, they had used these sophisticated technology like a shuffling machine that can read the cards and then transmits to an off-site operator who would then transmit the information to the players at the table who are in on the fix. And then X-ray reading tables and contact lenses that could see the cards or see the marked cards. And what's funny is I actually have a friend who does play in these games, and I don't think he played in these specific games, but there had been talk really from him. He said, like, listen, there are guys who use these contacts in all these games. Like, it's a big problem. Eastern European gangsters, what have you, they use the contacts to effectively read marked cards to their advantage. Now, this is something a little bit more extreme because you have the Bananas, you have the Genovese, and the Gambinos involved. And I think they were used, they effectively were used as like the muscle and the intimidation. So the guys who were swindled at these games, when they didn't pay up, these guys would come in, kind of shake them down and then get a cut of that. But I think in the case of Billups, like, what did it say he got paid though? See, that's to me is like, I focus extensively on the Rozier, but in terms of the Billups and his involvement, whether he got a cut from the organizers, I guess because he was involved and was a paid participant, then yes, that effectively makes him,
from what I understand,
a suspect.
And that he was paid a sum of money, and he would leave. He'd make an excuse to leave 15, 20 minutes into the game because he didn't feel like playing with these people. It was just to get everybody else there. Just as you were saying. Did you, I know the Bureau connected the dots here, but is there anything in your research that you were able to see that helped you connect the dots with these two things?
Well, I think one is obviously the Damon Jones and the Billups aspect. I don't think La Cosa Nostra was as heavily involved in the Rozier indictment as they are in this one. In the poker game. And this is actually a question I have for you guys is like, you do notice that there are a lot of co-conspirators and John Does and unidentified people there, which I think Chris Swecker had made this point, which is, he goes like, these are guys who you come to think there are a lot of either cooperating witnesses or certainly confidential informants here.
Absolutely.
As you had kind of touched on earlier, that help flesh out this case. And so I'm sure once this goes to trial,
there's always an unindicted co-conspirator, and that's the person that we call a CW or cooperating witness. And then you have your informants or your confidential informants. But I would say that the majority of the individuals that help break this case are individuals that are cooperating witnesses. And what they did is they found a guy. They said, okay, Daniel Rosen is one of these guys that's involved in these games all the time. He's involved in this, and we know what he's doing. We're going to talk to him and tell him, look, let's get the goods on you. And then once we get the goods on you, Dan, then we're going to flip you. And now you're going to start working for us. And you're going to be working off your charges. And that's the way things are done. And very rarely do you see a case where you get absolutely nobody. There's always someone that says, hey, I'm willing to do a deal. I'm willing to bargain. And that's what kind of probably happened here. So when you look at this, when you look at the type of thing here,
Yeah, there's very few players, either quasi-legit players like the victims we were talking about earlier, but there's very few people involved in this whole thing that don't stink to high heaven to some degree.
Absolutely.
I mean, between mobsters, wannabe mobsters, hangers-on to these professional players, and these big money guys that they're upping their game by playing with the big boys. There's no one among these people you're going to like. I'm looking at it from an agent's perspective if I'm going to be dealing with them. And it isn't about who you like or dislike, quite frankly. It's which is the one or multiple ones that you can, develop the best rapport with and an attempt to get them to work with you to help themselves. They're not doing it out of altruism or philanthropy. They're doing it because you've got something on them, and you're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office in a case like this, and you're telling these guys, look, either you're going to work for us or you're doing multiple years in Rikers or somewhere even worse, or play the game with us and take it from there. But yeah, these are one of the cases that the agents are basically holding their nose the entire time. But you have to deal with these people. Same with like drugs. Anyone working in the drug, against the cartels and organized drug rings, they're just, even the people buying the drugs, hear the people playing the games, people placing the bets. There's not too many among them that you may really like or see as nice guys. But as Ray was saying, someone's cooperating. It started with one person, then two, then three, and then we'll see the guys even, will Billups or Damon Jones wind up cooperating down the line. Who knows? They may have a lot more to lose reputation-wise and career-wise. But I just read an article that the Rozier's team and Heat, the coach and the rest of the players are all supporting him adamantly. We stand behind him. We're praying for him. I like to think when God is measuring all the prayers up in heaven, maybe the NBA guy caught up in this is put those kind of at the lower end of the tier. But yeah, they're supporting him, and I get it. It's a team. Ray, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. You played 4 years of college football.
Right.
Is there any way someone could have come to your team and said, we want to throw a game?
Could you have
done it individually? I know you wouldn't. But, I mean, could you just not played well? But you're going to get beat up if you're not doing your job on the offensive line or something.
Well, I wasn't Division I, so there's not a camera on me. The only camera on you is the film that they're filming you, that they will look at, and you get your ass chewed out on Monday because of what you did. A lot of guys get their ass chewed out. Sometimes I wonder, are those guys on the take? But is there money at every level in every sport? Hell yeah, there is. Guys bet on Little League games. If a father can do something to have, I mean, it's amazing. But the thing is with these cooperators that are cooperating in this case, what's going to happen? A lot of these guys are going, hey, look, if I cooperate, there's no way that I can go to jail. I can't go to jail with these guys. If I go to jail with these guys, they're going to kill me. What are you going to do to prevent me from getting whacked? How are you going to protect me? And then, you look at different things. We're going to relocate them. We're going to put them in WITSEC, which is the Witness Protection Program, as you heard of before. But, I mean, there's all those things that they need to deal with as they're kind of looking at this with these individuals. But, yeah, do I know? I have quite a few guys that I know that made it to the next level, both in baseball and in football, up at the professional level. And I never heard them ever say anything about that before. But you look at all the players and you look at the things like the movie Blue Chips, you look at that movie and you look at how they tried to pay different players and different things of that nature. They were throwing games. And you're right, Daniel. I mean, it is so lucrative. And these guys, if they see a chance to make a little bit of money, and you got to remember where they're coming from. And I can tell you when I worked and I did a little bit of work with the Eagles, with the Philadelphia Eagles, talking to them about some of the pitfalls of exactly what we're talking about now. And you got these guys that are making this money that they've never, ever seen before. Because back then, when I was doing it, they didn't pay college players like for the endorsements like they're doing today, how college sports has kind of changed. And these guys, they get $1 million. They don't know what to do with this money. And they have this money and they're sitting there. And I remember talking to Harold Carmichael and he says, hey, what can you tell these guys? What can you help me tell these guys? How can I help these guys? Because he was part of that player development to help these individuals. And I says, look, temptation's going to be there. And you go, doesn't matter with these professional players, everywhere they go, they make $1 million, but everything they get is for free. Free dinner, free car, free suit. Just let me use your name. It's amazing the money that's thrown at these athletes. And sometimes, and I'll tell you, there was a car theft ring, and they wound up selling some of the cars to some of the Philadelphia Eagles. I remember talking to Ray Rhodes about it. I mean, it was amazing with some of these guys. And they just thought, I'm getting the price because of who I am. And that wasn't the case. That was not the case. They're buying a $100,000 car for $25,000. Nah, it's not, that doesn't work that way. But these guys have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They really don't.
And, to kind of go back to an earlier point you guys have made about, especially as it relates to cooperating witnesses, it goes back to Steve Carbone. Steve had told me, his philosophy in developing informants was, you follow the bouncing ball. So when you make an arrest, as in the case of like Henry Hill, or as you would guess in this gambling case, one of the initial arrests is, all right, you either go to prison or you can basically see how you can get that guy, get you to another person, get you to the next, the bigger crime, the bigger conspiracy, and just follow and develop a case until you can get over 30 people to arrest and charge. And there's basically a book project I'm working on now about an operation called Operation Petrified Forest that was in, Operation Petrified Forest that was in, my son's in my room.
Yeah, no worries.
We can edit this out.
We can edit it out. No worries.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, guys. No, but Operation Petrified Forest, where they had used this guy, Angelo Dietrich, he was a convicted killer, and they used him to infiltrate a gun and narcotics ring in Brooklyn, and he just kept buying guns and drugs. And a guy named George Hanna. I don't know if you ever come across with him, but he had handled this guy along with Eileen O'Rourke, and they just managed to build a conspiracy. Build the case. And I think they arrested like 38 people in total. And so there is something to be said where, like, if you see a case like this, like the NBA case where there's so many arrests and there's so many different defendants, can I hit pause, guys?
Yep, sure. Nope, you got it.
It happens.
Absolutely.
I guess maybe we can sort of start wrapping it up. And I know we have about 3 or 4 questions from.
Yeah, you want me to read them or you want to read them?
You got them. Go with them.
Okay.
You're a good question reader.
I appreciate that.
Actually, I don't have them in front of me anyways. I did see them earlier, but of course they're on my phone too.
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries, Dan. Good to go.
I had to get Hot Wheels out of my room. But basically it's when you follow the bounce, to Steve's point, you follow the bouncing ball, you try to develop an informant, you build the case over a number of years, and then, you get something like this, which is a big drag.
I can tell you, Daniel, and I'll give you an example. I did a case that involved Department of Defense at Boeing, where there was the selling of drugs inside of the facility. Now, there's 5,000 employees at this facility, so it's like a city. People live there. They're working overtime. It took me a year to be able to develop the information and the informant. We knew it was going on, but it was difficult to break through. So imagine, and that's drugs and some other things too. So imagine the high level these individuals are and what it took to break through. And once you break through, you're like, it's just a bouncing ball. It takes you all over the place. And it's amazing what it can do. And I'll tell you, if you ever get a chance, what you want to do is you want to wait till this dies down and the guys that ran this case retire and talk to them and let them tell you the story. The story is not so much what happened. It's everything behind the scenes that went on that is the interesting part to it. It really is. But with that, when you look at some of the sentences here, have you researched what some of these individuals might wind up getting?
Well, John Tay Porter, who was the two-way player who was convicted, he's facing 20 years in prison. Those sentences, without citing any hard numbers, it's going to be within that ballpark.
Yeah, I think so too.
I mean, in terms of Rozier, it's safe to say his career's done. Who knows? That is, if he fights it and he's found not guilty, and he can go back in. But I don't see how he plays the NBA. He's certainly not going to play this season. But yeah,
the one thing about the Bureau, and Jim can attest to this, if they come after you, they usually have you pretty good. So they don't come and arrest you because they think they have you. That's been my experience.
I talked to maybe a mobster once, but certainly a seasoned criminal in New York, and he used a sports analogy for the type of prison sentences you could get. The best would be baseball time because the numbers are lower. Kind of you know where I'm going with this. Mid-range is football time. You get basketball time, you're doing 30 to 50 years or beyond, or certainly into the hundreds, depending on how that goes. With these basketball-related crimes, you're definitely talking football years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
go ahead, Daniel. For the Boston College, Kuhn got something like, he got more than 5 years. I know that. I think he did. Roy Kuhn. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure. But to your point,
I hear you. I hear you. So what do you think with the future of the NBA and professional sports gambling? What does the future look like?
I mean, they're going to have to make changes. I think, especially with the NBA, they have to work with FanDuel and all these other legal sport houses and restricting prop betting on certain players. I think they probably should just get rid of prop betting altogether, but that's never going to happen. But there are ways to exploit the game for to the, I hate saying like the bad guy's advantage, but certainly a person who's going to exploit it for the wrong reasons. There are going to find ways. And so the NBA is always going to, the outcome of a game and the integrity of the game is going to be in question for the short term. At least for me, who is a fan, who certainly is kind of just, I used to be a big NBA fan, but I have lost interest over time because it seems that the level of competition, and I don't want to say the sincerity of it, but certainly, this definitely brings into question whether these outcomes are genuine, and who may be doctoring their performance, to benefit the outcome.
Well, here's a question for you. I have Ben Simmons. Did he really have the yips, or do you think he was throwing things?
Are you a Sixers fan, or?
Of course I am. I'm a Philly guy.
I think if you're a Sixers fan, then yeah, probably. Yeah. I understand that because I'm 5'9". I'm never going to be able to play professional, but yeah, I'd never be able to play. I mean, you play football. I would never be able to play basketball, but it baffles my mind that someone who is healthy and who's made it to that far in the NBA would suddenly just have that, the case of the yips, as you say. I don't get it. And so, I mean, whether that was to benefit the outcome of the game, who knows? More will be revealed, I guess, in that regard. But like, it baffles the mind that someone who is healthy, I mean, granted, in his case, he does have a bad back, but yeah, that's the other unfortunate result of this scandal, which is now you're starting to look back at games and players and think, well, Ben Simmons said he had the yips, but wait, what was there something else at play here? Was it to benefit a wager? That's what stinks, because now you're starting to question all the outcomes. I mean, I'm a Mets fan. I just think the Mets stink. I don't think they're doing it for money.
Well, I think they tanked. Phillies,
Yep. Yeah.
What are you going to do?
But what are you going to do?
Ray, we have some questions from
We do have some questions for you, Dan, from our audience. This is from Nessa in Portland, Oregon. Her question is, how much involvement do you think Rozier and Billups had leading up to the scandal breaking?
I mean, in terms of like cooperating?
Either or, cooperating with involvement in the actual playing of things that were going on.
Well, I know Rozier had been under investigation for a while, at least as early as this January. And as for Billups, if the charges are true, this was a game in 2023 where, if he was co-conspirator number 8 and he did give him information that, that was 2 years ago. And I think, the fact that I can't remember when he took the job with the Blazers. It was after 2019, but the poker thing happened in 2019. And so, yeah, it's, how he fed in the information and how he, how long, whether it was a connection that he made through the poker thing remains to be seen. But yeah, I think all signs point to this being somewhat of a long. This wasn't like a new phenomenon. This had been slow building.
So these guys have been involved in it from the very beginning, in other words.
To a degree, very early, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with Rozier, because like Rozier's, like he was working with a friend of his. What was his name?
I think it was a childhood friend.
De Niro Laster. Yeah. Who was a former athlete himself, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't think we actually laid it out this evening. I mean, it's been laid out in the indictment and others. But this game that Rozier threw, he wound up getting $200,000 cash delivered to him like the next day or something. That's how the indictment reads, or at least the information I have. And this is a guy who's made well over $1 million over 3 to 5 years, something like that. Now, we didn't talk about the whole thing with gambling addiction. Is that part of his problem? But like you said earlier, Dan, even though you're making all these big bucks, a lot of it's going to agents and managers and lawyers, things like that. Quick $200,000 cash given to you in a bag for actually not working at the job, to pulling yourself out of a game. That's like, hey, I'm not a chump. I can still make money even without all these other people setting it up for me. So you have to really ask yourself what kind of logic kicks in when you're making this kind of millions of dollars, but $200,000, which is essentially chump change, still winds up probably ruining your career and very possibly putting you in jail for football years, as we were saying earlier.
Yeah, but it's tax-free.
Exactly. It's the easiest $200,000 you can make.
Exactly.
Think about it.
Exactly.
Well, he won't be paying taxes in prison either, so that's an advantage.
This comes from Brad in San Diego, California. He wants to know if you can tell us more about the X-ray tables and the special glasses.
Well, as far as the X-ray tables are concerned, from what I understand, and I could talk specifically about the shuffling machines, these shuffling machines are commercially available, but the guys who had bought it, they had doctored it with card reading technology. And in terms of the contacts that these guys were wearing, we had paused for a second because I do want to read up on this, actually.
Sure, no worries.
Because I have the indictment up right now. Because I know.
Take a pause and then we'll come back to that question. So let's pause for a couple minutes, and you can go ahead and read that. And just back with that question.
I want to get this down pat. Where is it? Yeah, because have you ever seen these things in action, you guys? Like these card readers and yeah. Just from what I know from the indictment itself, without having gone to it's they had like electronic poker chip trays that could read the cards that are placed on the table. They, I think they had decoy telephones, cell telephones. We can turn on right now.
All right, let's go back on. We'll go back on live. Here's another question. It's from Brad in San Diego, California. He wants to know if you can tell us more about these X-ray tables and these special glasses and other contraptions they had at their disposal in these poker games. Yeah, so they had, we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, the rigged shuffling machines, that have been doctored to include this hidden technology that could read the cards in the deck. So you can see, which player had the best poker hand. And then they had they're like decoy phones that were placed on the table. And they could surreptitiously detect, which cards were on the table. And some of these playing cards also had markers that were visible only to some of the players who were in on the game that were wearing these specially designed contact lenses or sunglasses. And I think I said earlier, I had a friend of mine who does do these these underground games that are legit. But, there have been stories of Eastern European gangsters and other guys who do wear these contacts or these glasses. Are able to spot cards that have been marked that only the contacts can detect, and ultimately use that to their advantage. Well, unbelievable. I would love to be able to just sit down and just pick up and use the equipment to see what it's like. It's got to be amazing. Must be amazing. Mm-hmm. All right. This next question is from Brandon in Washington, D.C. And his question is, from a psychological standpoint, why do wealthy people sometimes involve themselves in criminal activity that yields pennies on the dollar compared to what they made in their professional careers? I think we kind of answered that. Tax-free. Yeah, it's tax-free. That's for sure. Yeah, tax-free, quick money, very easy. I think another thing is I think you can never have enough, and greed always enters into the equation. The greedy people always get caught. Greedy people always get caught.
You also wonder if there's some degree of psychopathy at work here, some sort of psychological issues in terms of being a psychopath, and it doesn't mean you're out killing people, and that's a whole different level. But an even lower level to succeed, maybe even in professional sports, to come to some degree, you really have to know how to focus on your opponent's weaknesses. And I don't know, and ways to get over other people. You can do it legitimately on a basketball court with a sleight of hand and a fake left but go right. But maybe that's not enough all the time on the court itself and between the lines. And someone comes to you with a proposition, even though you have all the money in the world, a quick $200,000. All I got to do is show up or just go out, at the 9-minute point. Yeah, I can do that. So again, there may be some deep-rooted psychological issues involved in some of this too, in which people just want to, bring out some sort of a bad boy in themselves and say, yeah, I'm not only this Mr. Clean guy getting all the money on the court playing basketball, but I can play dirty too and get ahead that way. So it's probably complicated, but I think more players will not go this way, but there are some out there that just feel if the temptation is there, let's take it, and it makes them somehow feel better. I also think there's also like a very practical kind of just obvious thing, which is it's very expensive to be rich, to live. And when you have these players who are buying gigantic homes and multiple cars, the upkeep on all that is a lot of money, and your salary can only go so far. And so I'm not citing a specific case, and who knows, like Terry Rozier was using this to pay, to help with his mortgage. But like, the end of the day, that does in some ways explain like why guys, if you're going to make
money that's going to help with pay for this and that. I imagine.
And they're giving, like I said earlier, they're giving 5 to 10, maybe 15% away to a number of people in their lives. They're making that kind of money. So to quickly beat that little internal system, a quick 200,000 grand, and 100% of it goes to you. What a deal, right? Why not do it? And I'm sure that happens more than we even know about.
We got a couple more here. This is from Tim from Trenton, New Jersey. Do you think more active and past players and coaches are involved with this?
I think the suspicion is yes, especially the poker game. I think it was like, it may have been Antonio Gates, I can't remember, but there are other professional athletes who are used as lures in these poker games were involved in the past. And in terms of players, yeah, I think you and I, we had talked about this. Maybe it's Ben Simmons, maybe not, but certainly other players, certain things will come to light. Yeah, and the question is whether, like, maybe, we don't know. I think to your point earlier, which you had said that in terms of the of the cooperators, whether there is a current player cooperating or a coach cooperating, then,
you wonder.
It could be like, you wonder, yeah.
Fitz said also, everybody from Miami Heat is supporting Rozier. Could it be that there's someone else from that team that was also involved and he's hoping that he doesn't say anything about him? That's a bit.
There's a lot of people sweating right now. I can tell you.
Absolutely, there's a lot of people.
Yeah, who's going to talk? Who's going to give me up?
Who's going to give me up? Yeah.
And they're talking to lawyers now, and the lawyers may be saying, if you come forward to the FBI, you can minimize some of the damages against you.
Right.
So they're weighing all these options now.
There's a lot of people out there, though, that, to your right, Jimmy, they are sweating bullets. They really are, and they should be sweating bullets. But here's a question, our last one, Dan, from Jeff in Los Angeles. Why do basketball players seem to be more susceptible to bribery than anybody else?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think this kind of feeds into the previous question, which is, in terms of how susceptible this is, I think investigators, if they aren't, I'm sure they will, which is, if you're going to look at past games from the past 3-4 years, you look at teams like the Heat who do use a lot of two-way players, and the Detroit Pistons and the Sixers and other teams that do rely on two-way play contracts. I'm sure they're looking back at players to see if any of them had been, had manipulated their performances out of the benefit of prop betting, because that in itself, when you're a two-way player like Jonte Porter, you're not making as much money as the others. That's where the susceptibility lies, which is, all right, this is a good chance to make more money than you would on an average, than the contract or a max contract that you're unlikely to get. And so I think that probably explains part of it. But in terms of basketball itself, it seems, who knows, maybe it could have been the fact that it seemed to be easy to get away with until just recently.
Here's a question I have for you that's from me. Do you know any NBA player under current contract, past, present, or even in the future, that is paid more than $200,000 per game, like Rozier was?
I mean, LeBron's what, like a $50 million per year?
Is it? Does he make? But think about that. I don't know what it is, but think about $200,000 for one game. LeBron's he's an anomaly. He makes more money than most countries have as their GNP. But when you look at some of these guys, when they say $200,000, $100,000 for one night, who wouldn't take that?
Yeah, no, it's like a speaking. It's what most ex-presidents get for speaking fees.
Yeah, and they don't even deserve that. Right?
Or Juan Soto gets, I think he gets that at each at bat. So
something like that. Yeah,
something like that.
Well, this has been very interesting. I know I've learned a lot, and I no doubt our audience did too. Ray, last few words, and I'll take us out.
Daniel, it's been a pleasure. I'd love to do it again. I'd love to talk about some of the other things, especially some of the FBI stories that you've had the opportunity to work in the past. I know we spent a lot of time on this one tonight, but I'd love to pick your brain about some of the other things that have happened. I've been reading up on some of your things, and I find them fascinating, and I find you fascinating. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. And likewise, guys. And it was a real pleasure to be here and a real honor, too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, journalism has taken a hit in the last decade or plus, but I like seeing journalists like you out there. I know you're not just a sports journalist guy. You work other criminal stuff and FBI stuff. So, yeah, keep up the good work and do your best to keep that profession alive and well. Everyone, thanks again for listening to this episode of Cold Red. Thanks again to our guest, Daniel Rosen, and, of course, my co-host, Ray Carr. Please check us out on coldredpodcast.com. Like and subscribe. to us in that regard. Thanks to our producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling, and everyone, once again, thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Cold Red, and see you next time on that exact same podcast, Cold Red.